Thomas Bennett stood in front of his bathroom mirror, running his hand through his graying beard. 6 months. It had been 6 months since he buried Rebecca up on the hill behind their cabin. 6 months since he'd felt like a real person instead of just a ghost walking through his own life. The cabin felt too big now. Too quiet. Every corner reminded him of her laugh, her cooking, the way she'd hum while folding laundry. He couldn't even look at the rocking chair by the fireplace without his chest tightening. That was her spot. Nobody else's. Thomas splashed cold water on his face and grabbed his coat. Work was the only thing that kept him going these days. His small timber business didn't run itself, and the physical labor helped him sleep at night. Well, sometimes it did. Other nights he'd just lie there, staring at the empty space beside him in bed. The town folks had stopped checking on him after the first month. He'd pushed them all away, politely but firmly. He didn't want casseroles or sympathy or advice about moving forward. He just wanted to be left alone with his grief. March in Montana was unpredictable. One day you'd have sunshine, the next you'd get hit with a storm that reminded you winter wasn't quite done yet. Thomas had learned to read the sky after 20 years up here. And tonight the sky was angry. He'd just finished stacking wood in the shed when the first drops hit. Within minutes it turned into a full assault of rain mixed with sleet. The wind howled through the pine trees, bending them like they were nothing but grass. Thomas hurried inside, grateful he'd stocked up on supplies last week. He was heating up some soup when he heard it. A sound that didn't belong to the storm. Knocking. Desperate, frantic knocking on his front door. Thomas froze. Nobody came up here, especially not in weather like this. The closest neighbor was 3 miles down the mountain. He grabbed his flashlight and opened the door. A woman stood there, soaked to the bone and shaking. She was pregnant, very pregnant, and her face was pale with fear and cold. Thomas recognized her vaguely from town, though he couldn't remember ever speaking to her. "Please," she said, her teeth chattering. "My car went off the road. I walked here. I saw your lights." Thomas didn't hesitate. Whatever his feelings about company, he wasn't going to leave a pregnant woman out in a storm. "Get inside," he said, stepping back. She stumbled in, dripping water all over his floor. Up close, he could see she was shivering violently, her lips tinged blue. This wasn't good. "Bathroom's down the hall," Thomas said, already moving toward the bedroom. "I'll get you dry clothes. You need to get out of those wet things now." He pulled out some of Rebecca's clothes from the drawer he'd been avoiding for months. Sweatpants with a drawstring, a large flannel shirt, thick socks. His hands shook slightly as he brought them to the bathroom door. 10 minutes later, she emerged wrapped in his old bathrobe over the clothes, her wet hair hanging in dark strands. She looked a little less like death, but still pretty rough. "Sit by the fire," Thomas said, stirring the soup. "What's your name?" "Claire," she said, lowering herself carefully onto the couch. Not Rebecca's chair. He was grateful for that. "Claire Morrison. I'm sorry to barge in like this. I didn't know what else to do." "Nothing to be sorry for," Thomas said, bringing her a bowl of soup and some bread. "Eat this. You need to warm up from the inside." She took the bowl with both hands, holding it like it was precious. "Thank you. I'm 7 months along, and when the car started sliding, all I could think about was the baby." Thomas nodded, settling into his own chair across from her. "How far did you walk?" "Maybe half a mile? It felt like forever in this weather. My phone's dead and I couldn't get any signal anyway." She took a sip of soup and closed her eyes. "This is really good. It's just canned soup," Thomas said. "Still the best thing I've tasted all day." They sat in silence for a while, the fire crackling between them. The storm outside was getting worse. Thomas could hear branches snapping and the wind testing every corner of his cabin. "You'll have to stay here tonight," he said finally. "Can't do anything about your car until this passes, and you're in no condition to go back out there." Claire looked relieved. "Are you sure? I don't want to impose. You're not imposing. It's just reality." He stood up. "I'll make up the guest room. You should rest." But as he turned to go, she spoke again. "You're Thomas Bennett, right? I've seen you in town. At the hardware store." "That's right." "I'm sorry about your wife," she said softly. "I heard about it. I know that probably doesn't mean much from a stranger, but I am sorry." Thomas's jaw tightened. He wasn't ready for this conversation. "Thank you," he managed. "Get some rest." He retreated to the guest room, pulling fresh sheets from the closet. Rebecca had always kept the house ready for visitors, even though they rarely came. Now he was grateful for her habits. The storm raged for 3 days. 3 long days trapped in the cabin with a stranger. At first they barely spoke beyond necessities. Thomas would make meals, Claire would thank him, and they'd sit in separate silences. But on the second day, something shifted. Claire was looking at the photographs on the mantel, pictures of him and Rebecca through the years. 20 years, Thomas found himself saying. We had 20 good years together. Claire turned and he saw understanding in her eyes. Not pity, understanding. My husband died 8 months ago, she said quietly. Construction accident. 1 minute he was fine, the next he was gone. I found out I was pregnant 2 weeks after his funeral. Thomas sat down heavily. I'm sorry. His family blamed me. Said I got pregnant on purpose to trap him to get his insurance money. Her voice broke slightly. We'd been married for 5 years. We planned this baby, but they never accepted me, and when he died, they cut me off completely. That why you're here? In Montana? I thought they'd want to be part of the baby's life, at least. But they told me to leave and never come back, so I did. I've been renting a little place in town for 2 months now. They talked more that day than Thomas had talked to anyone in months. About grief, about loneliness, about the strange experience of going through motions when your heart feels dead inside. Claire told him about her fears of raising a baby alone, of not being enough, of failing before she even started. Thomas told her about the emptiness of the cabin, how he couldn't bring himself to move Rebecca's things but couldn't stand to look at them either. She wanted kids, he said on the 3rd day, staring into his coffee. We tried for years. It just never happened. Eventually we accepted it would just be the 2 of us. And that was okay. We were happy, but she would have loved being a grandmother if we'd had kids who had kids. She sounds like she was wonderful, Claire said. She was. Thomas looked up. Your husband sounds like he was a good man too. He was. Jake was the best person I ever knew. By the time the storm broke on the 4th morning, something had changed between them. They weren't exactly friends, but they weren't strangers anymore either. They were 2 people who understood what it meant to lose everything and keep breathing anyway. Thomas helped Claire down to her car. It was muddy and stuck, but not badly damaged. He called his buddy with a tow truck, then drove Claire back to town in his pickup. At her rental house, a small weathered place that had seen better days, Claire turned to him before getting out. Thank you, Thomas, for everything. Not just the shelter, but for listening, for understanding. Take care of yourself, he said. And that baby? She nodded and went inside. Thomas drove home expecting to slip back into his solitary routine, but something unexpected happened. The next day he found himself thinking about Claire, about her fears, about that run-down rental she was living in, about what would happen when the baby came and she had nobody. Before he could talk himself out of it, he loaded his truck with firewood and drove back to town. When Claire answered the door, surprise and gratitude flooded her face. I noticed your woodpile was pretty low, Thomas said gruffly. Thought I'd bring some by. It was the first step. Neither of them knew it yet. But that simple act of kindness was about to change both their lives in ways they couldn't imagine. The firewood delivery turned into fixing Claire's leaking roof, which turned into checking on her every few days, which turned into something Thomas hadn't expected at all, having a reason to wake up in the morning that didn't feel like punishment. He'd show up at her door with his toolbox, or some groceries, or just to make sure she was okay. At first, he told himself it was just common decency. You don't leave a pregnant widow to fend for herself in a mountain town where she doesn't know anyone. Rebecca would have wanted him to help, but somewhere along the way it became more than duty. Claire made him laugh. Actually laugh for the first time in months. She'd tell him stories about her disastrous attempts at understanding Montana weather, or her battles with the ancient furnace in her rental, and he'd find himself smiling despite everything. I swear that thing is possessed, she said one afternoon, pointing at the furnace. It only works when I'm nice to it. It's 30 years old, Thomas said, examining it. Probably just needs a new part. I'll pick one up tomorrow. You don't have to do all this, Claire said softly. I know you've got your own life, your own grief. I don't want to be a burden. Thomas straightened up, wiping his hands on a rag. You're not a burden. Truth is, helping you is helping me. Gives me something to focus on besides the empty rooms in my cabin. Claire nodded, understanding in her eyes. Still, thank you. I don't know what I'd do without you. The town noticed, of course. Small towns always notice. Thomas could feel the stares when he walked through the hardware store or stopped by the diner. He could hear the whispers cutting off when he got too close. One morning at the gas station, he overheard two women talking. 6 months, one was saying. That's all it took for him to replace poor Rebecca, and with a pregnant woman, no less. You know what that means? Thomas's hands tightened on the gas pump. He wanted to turn around and set the record straight. But what was the point? People would believe what they wanted to believe. Claire heard the gossip, too. She mentioned it one evening when Thomas stopped by to help assemble the crib she'd ordered. Mrs. Henderson at the grocery store asked me how long you and I have been together, she said, not meeting his eyes. I told her we're just friends, but she gave me this look like she didn't believe me. Let them talk, Thomas said, focusing on the crib instructions. We know the truth. Does it bother you that they think you've moved on from Rebecca so quickly? Thomas was quiet for a moment. What bothers me is that they think I could ever move on from Rebecca. She was my whole world for 20 years. But she's gone and I'm still here and I've got to figure out what that means. He looked up at Claire. Helping you doesn't mean I've forgotten her. It means I'm trying to survive in a world without her. Claire's eyes filled with tears. I feel the same way about Jake. Sometimes I feel guilty for laughing or having a good day. Like I'm betraying his memory by not being sad every single second. Rebecca wouldn't want me to stop living, Thomas said, and I bet Jake wouldn't want that for you either. They sat together in the small nursery, surrounded by pieces of unassembled furniture, two broken people trying to figure out how to keep going. It wasn't romantic. It wasn't about replacing the people they'd lost. It was just about not being alone in the darkness. As Claire's due date got closer, Thomas found himself thinking about things he'd buried years ago. The babies that never came. The nursery they'd started to paint before Rebecca got sick. The dreams of tiny feet running through their cabin. He'd made peace with childlessness when Rebecca was alive. They'd traveled, spoiled their friends' kids, built a good life together. But now, helping Claire prepare for her baby, all those old longings came back. Not for himself exactly, but for what could have been. One afternoon, he was in his workshop carving a wooden rattle when Claire stopped by. She rarely came to his cabin, but her car was getting more reliable now that he'd helped her fix it up. I hope I'm not interrupting, she said, looking around the workshop with interest. I wanted to bring you this, she held up a container. I made too much stew and I know you probably just heat up canned soup most nights. Thomas smiled despite himself. Come on in, I was just finishing this. He held up the rattle shaped like a little bear. Claire's face lit up. Thomas, that's beautiful. Did you make that for the baby? Figured every kid needs a good wooden toy, he said, feeling suddenly self-conscious. My dad made me one when I was born. I've still got it somewhere. She's going to love it, Claire said, her hand on her belly. I've decided it's a girl. I don't know for sure, wanted to be surprised, but I have a feeling. Got a name picked out. Hope, Claire said softly. Because that's what she is. My hope that life can be good again. Something in Thomas's chest cracked open at those words. He understood exactly what she meant. 2 weeks before her due date, Thomas taught Claire everything he could think of about mountain living. How to start the generator when the power went out. Where the emergency supplies were kept. Which neighbors could be trusted in a crisis. You're not going to be here, Claire asked, looking worried. I'll be here, Thomas assured her. But you should know these things anyway. Independence is important up here. Thomas, she said seriously. When the baby comes, will you be there? At the hospital? I don't have anyone else and I'm scared. He didn't hesitate. I'll be there. I promise. 3 days later, his phone rang at 2 a.m. Claire's voice was tight with pain. It's time. The contractions are 5 minutes apart. Thomas was dressed and in his truck within 3 minutes. The hospital was 40 minutes away in good conditions. He made it in 35, driving faster than he probably should have, but not caring. Claire needed him. She was already in a hospital gown when he arrived, breathing through contractions with a nurse coaching her. When she saw Thomas, relief washed over her face. You came, she said. Told you I would. The next 12 hours were the longest of Thomas's life. He'd never been present for a birth before. He held Claire's hand when she needed it, gave her ice chips, and tried not to panic when the doctors started using words like distress and emergency procedures. But at 4 p.m, a baby's cry filled the room. High and strong and absolutely perfect, it's a girl, the doctor said, placing the tiny, squirming bundle on Claire's chest. Congratulations. Thomas stood back, watching Claire's face transform as she looked at her daughter for the first time. This was a private moment, sacred. He turned to leave, to give them space. "Thomas, wait!" Claire called out. "Come meet her, please." He approached slowly, looking down at the smallest person he'd ever seen. She had a full head of dark hair and was waving tiny fists in the air, already mad at the world. "Hope," Claire whispered. "Her name is Hope." Thomas felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. Joy. Pure, uncomplicated joy. "She's perfect," he said, his voice rough. "Thank you for being here," Claire said, tears streaming down her face. "Thank you for everything." Thomas stayed until Claire fell asleep, exhausted from labor. He looked at baby Hope in her clear bassinet, so tiny and new and full of possibility. This little girl had no idea that she'd helped save 2 broken people just by existing. He went home that night and did something he hadn't done since Rebecca died. He went up to the hill where she was buried and talked to her. "I met a baby today," he told the headstone. "Her name is Hope. I think you would have loved her. I think you would have loved her mom too. Claire's good people, Beck. She's been through hell just like me. And somehow helping her has made the days a little more bearable." The wind rustled through the pines and Thomas could almost hear Rebecca's voice. "Keep going," it seemed to say. "Keep living. That's all I ever wanted for you." The next morning, Thomas went back to the hospital with flowers and a carved wooden bear. But when he walked into Claire's room, he knew immediately something was wrong. Claire was holding Hope, but she was crying. Not happy tears. These were the tears of someone breaking apart. "Claire? What's wrong? Is the baby okay?" She looked up at him, and the anguish in her eyes stopped him cold. "Thomas," she whispered, "I need to tell you something. Something I should have told you before, but I was too afraid. I was too ashamed." He sat down slowly, dread building in his chest. "What is it?" And then Claire told him everything. The truth she'd been hiding. The secret that changed everything he thought he knew about Hope's story, and Thomas realized that the complicated part was just beginning. Claire's hands shook as she held Hope. The baby was sleeping peacefully, completely unaware of the storm about to break around her. 3 years into my marriage," Claire began, her voice barely above a whisper, "Jake and I went through a rough patch. Nothing terrible, just normal marriage stuff. We were both working too much, not communicating. I felt invisible." Thomas sat still, sensing this was something she needed to say without interruption. "I went to a work conference," she continued. "Jake couldn't come because he was on a big project. And there was this colleague, someone I'd worked with for years. We had dinner one night, too much wine, and I made the worst mistake of my life." She closed her eyes. "It was one time, just once, and I regretted it the second it was over." Thomas's expression didn't change. He just waited. "I ended it immediately. Told the guy it could never happen again. I went home and I worked on my marriage. I really worked on it. Jake and I went to counseling, we reconnected, and we became stronger than we'd ever been. I thought I'd put it behind me." Claire looked down at Hope, fresh tears falling. "But then we found out I was infertile. The doctor said my endometriosis was too severe. We'd never have biological children. Jake was heartbroken, but he said we'd adopt. He said we'd find a way." "And then you got pregnant?" Thomas said quietly. "Yes. 2 months after that diagnosis. The doctor said it was rare but possible. Sometimes endometriosis symptoms improve spontaneously. The timing meant it could have been Jake's baby. It had to be Jake's baby. I convinced myself it was, but it wasn't." Claire's face crumpled. "I told myself I was being paranoid. I didn't let myself think about it. And then Jake died, and this baby became his legacy. His family's legacy, or so I thought. When they rejected me, I clung even harder to the belief that Hope was Jake's daughter." She finally looked at Thomas, anguish written across every feature. "But when they put her on my chest yesterday, I saw it. She has this birthmark on her shoulder, shaped like a crescent moon. And she has these specific features, this certain way her ears are shaped. And I knew. I knew she wasn't Jake's." The room was silent except for Hope's soft breathing and the sounds of the hospital beyond the door. "Jake died believing his baby was on the way," Claire sobbed. "He died happy because he thought his child would carry on his name. But I lied to him, Thomas, even if I didn't mean to. Even if I convinced myself otherwise, I lied. And now I'm holding this baby and all I can see is my mistake. All I can feel is that I betrayed the best man I ever knew." Thomas was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, His voice was gentle but firm. Did you love Jake? More than anything. Did you want this baby when you found out you were pregnant? Yes. Desperately. Did Jake want this baby? It was all he talked about those last months. He was so excited. He'd already picked out names, started planning for her future. Claire's voice broke. He loved her before she was even born. Thomas leaned forward. Then she was his daughter. She is his daughter. But the DNA doesn't make a father, Claire. Love does. Showing up does. Jake loved this baby. He wanted this baby. That made him her father in every way that matters. But he died not knowing the truth. The truth is that he loved his daughter. That's all that matters. Thomas's voice was firm now. Look at me, Claire. She met his eyes, seeing something there she couldn't quite name. Rebecca and I couldn't have biological children, he said. For years that ate at me. I felt like I'd failed somehow, like I wasn't a complete man. But Rebecca told me something that stuck. She said being a parent isn't about biology. It's about choice. It's about choosing to love someone, choosing to show up for them every single day. This is different, Claire whispered. Is it? Jake chose to love Hope before she was born. He chose to be her father. Your mistake, something you deeply regret, doesn't erase that choice he made. It doesn't make his love less real. Claire looked down at Hope again, really looked at her this time. The baby stretched in her sleep, her tiny face peaceful. I can't bond with her, Claire admitted. Every time I look at her, I see what I did. I see how I betrayed Jake. How can I be her mother when I feel like this? You just told me the hardest truth you've ever had to tell, Thomas said. That took courage, and you're going to learn to forgive yourself. Not today. Maybe not for a while, but you will, because that little girl needs you to. What if I can't? What if I'm not enough for her? You are enough. You're her mother, and you're not going to do this alone. Something in his words made Claire look up sharply. Thomas, I can't ask you to. You're not asking. I'm offering. That baby needs a family, and you need support. I'm not trying to replace Jake. Nobody could, but I can be here. I can help. Why? Claire asked. Why would you do this? You barely know me. Thomas was quiet for a moment, gathering his thoughts. Because 6 months ago, I wanted to die. Not actively, but I didn't care if I woke up the next morning. Rebecca was gone, and I couldn't see a reason to keep going. Then you knocked on my door in a storm, and slowly, helping you gave me a reason to get out of bed. You saved my life without even knowing it. Thomas, let me finish. That little girl, she represents something to me. She's hope, just like her name says. Hope that life can be good again. Hope that we can survive the worst things and still find moments of joy. I'm not her father, and I'm not trying to be. But I'd like to be in her life if you'll let me. Claire was crying again, but differently now. You're a good man, Thomas Bennett. I'm just a man trying to figure out how to live again. Same as you. They sat together in that hospital room, 2 wounded people and a brand new baby, and something shifted. The burden Claire had been carrying alone suddenly felt lighter, shared. But the peace didn't last long. 2 days after Claire brought Hope home, Thomas was helping install a baby monitor when Claire's phone rang. She answered, then went pale. Yes, this is Claire Morrison, she said, her voice shaking. What? How did you? No, I don't think that's. Please, I need to think about this. She hung up, looking like she might be sick. That was David Chen, the colleague I. She couldn't finish the sentence. He somehow found out about Hope. He wants a paternity test. He's threatening to sue for custody. Thomas felt cold. How did he find out? I don't know. Someone must have told him. Maybe someone from the hospital. Maybe someone who knew I was pregnant. She sat down heavily. Thomas, he has money. Lots of money. His tech startup just went public. I saw it in the news last month. That doesn't give him rights, doesn't it? If he's the biological father, and he wants to be involved, doesn't he have rights? Claire's voice was rising with panic. I can barely afford this rental. I'm working freelance from home. He can offer her everything. He can offer her money, Thomas corrected. That's not the same as offering her love. A court might not see it that way, Thomas wanted to argue, but he knew she was right to be scared. The legal system didn't always get things right. Over the next week, they learned more about David Chen. He was wealthy, unmarried, and had been making a name for himself in the tech world. His company had just been featured in a major magazine. He looked good on paper. The paternity test confirmed what Claire already knew. David was Hope's biological father. His lawyer sent a letter demanding shared custody. He wanted Hope for weekends and holidays. He wanted his name on the birth certificate. He was talking about providing for his daughter, about giving her the best opportunities. But when David showed up at Claire's door to meet Hope for the first time, Thomas was there, and he saw something Claire couldn't see through her panic and guilt. David held Hope awkwardly like she was a prop. He smiled for the photo his assistant took, but his eyes were calculating. He talked about hiring the best nannies, enrolling her in the best schools, setting up trust funds. He never once asked about Hope's personality, her schedule, whether she was a good sleeper. He never asked Claire about the labor, the delivery, the middle-of-the-night feelings. He treated Hope like an acquisition, not a daughter. After he left, Thomas said what they were both thinking. He doesn't want to be her father. He wants to look like a father. Maybe, Claire said, bouncing Hope gently. But what if I'm wrong? What if I'm projecting my own guilt onto him? What if he could give her a better life? Could he give her a better life than a mother who loves her? I don't know if I can love her, Claire whispered. Not the way she deserves. You're holding her right now, aren't you? Comforting her. Making sure she's fed and changed and safe. That's love, Claire. It doesn't always feel like fireworks. Sometimes it just feels like showing up. But Claire's postpartum depression was getting worse, compounded by her guilt and the stress of David's custody demands. Thomas watched her struggle to connect with Hope, saw how she'd go through the motions mechanically, how she'd hand the baby to him whenever he offered. One night, he found her sitting in the dark nursery, just staring at nothing. I'm failing her, she said. Jake would be so disappointed in me. He'd be a better parent than this. Jake's not here, Thomas said gently. You are, and you're doing the best you can while dealing with depression and grief and fear. That's not failing. That's surviving. Is it enough, though? David's lawyer is right. I'm unstable, I'm poor, I'm alone. You're not alone, Thomas said firmly, and we're going to fight this, together. The custody hearing was set for 2 months away. David was pushing for immediate, partial custody, but the court wanted to see if he'd maintain interest in Hope first, so he started coming for supervised visits once a week. Thomas watched these visits carefully. He saw how David would check his phone constantly, how he'd hand Hope back to Claire the moment she cried. He saw how David talked about Hope to his friends and colleagues, always emphasizing his biological connection, his financial provisions, never mentioning the actual work of parenting. He doesn't love her, Thomas said one evening after David left. He loves the idea of her. But what if that's enough for a court? What if his money and status matter more than my love? Then we make sure the court sees the truth, Thomas said. We show them who the real parent is. Claire looked at him, hope and fear warring in her eyes. How? We tell the truth. All of it. About Jake. About your grief. About your depression. About how you're working every day to be the mother Hope needs. We show them that being a parent isn't about perfection or money. It's about showing up when it's hard, especially when it's hard. For the first time since Hope was born, Claire smiled. A real smile. You really believe we can win this? I believe Hope deserves to be with her mother. And I believe you're stronger than you think you are. Outside, the Montana wind howled through the pines. Inside, Thomas held his ground. He'd lost Rebecca, lost his chance at being a father, lost so much. But he wasn't going to stand by and watch Claire lose Hope. Not without a fight. The weeks leading up to the custody hearing were the hardest of Claire's life. The postpartum depression that had started after Hope's birth seemed to be getting worse, not better. Some mornings she could barely get out of bed. The guilt about Jake, the fear of losing Hope, the constant pressure of David's lawyers, it was crushing her. Thomas moved into the guest room. He told himself it was temporary, just until Claire got back on her feet. But both of them knew she couldn't do this alone. He took over the night feedings, letting Claire sleep. He'd sit in the rocking chair with Hope, her tiny body warm against his chest, and sing old songs his mother had sung to him. In those quiet hours, he felt something he'd never expected to feel, like a father. It terrified him. This wasn't his child. He had no legal connection to her, and yet when Hope looked up at him with those dark eyes, when she wrapped her tiny hand around his finger, he felt a bond that went deeper than biology. "You're getting attached," Claire said one morning, watching him change Hope's diaper with practiced ease. "Maybe," Thomas admitted. "Is that a problem?" "I'm worried about what happens if we lose. If David gets custody, he won't let you see her, and you'll have lost another person you care about." Thomas finished snapping Hope's onesie and picked her up. "That's not your problem to worry about. Focus on yourself right now." But Claire couldn't focus. The depression was making everything feel impossible. Finally, Thomas insisted she see the therapist that Dr. Adams had recommended. "I can't afford therapy," Claire protested weakly. "I'll pay for it," Thomas said. "Don't argue. Hope needs you healthy, and you can't get healthy without help." The therapist, Dr. Patricia Reeves, was a no-nonsense woman in her 50s who specialized in postpartum depression and grief counseling. After the first session, she called Thomas in. "Claire's struggling with several compounding issues," she explained. "The postpartum depression, unresolved grief over her husband, guilt about her past mistake, and fear about the custody situation." "It's a lot for anyone to handle. Will she get better?" Thomas asked. "With treatment and support, yes, but it's going to take time. She needs to understand that her feelings toward Hope are influenced by depression, not by reality. She loves that baby. She's just having trouble feeling it right now." Thomas nodded, relief washing over him. "Whatever she needs, we'll make it happen." Meanwhile, David's weekly visits continued. Each one reinforced Thomas's conviction that David didn't really want to be a father. He wanted the appearance of being a father. One week, David brought a photographer. He posed with Hope for a series of pictures that Thomas later saw on David's social media, accompanied by heartfelt captions about fatherhood and family. The comments were full of praise for what a good man David was for stepping up. Thomas wanted to throw his phone across the room. This man knew nothing about stepping up. He'd never been there at 2 a.m. when Hope had colic. He'd never worried about whether her formula was the right temperature or whether that rash was normal. He'd never sacrificed a single night of sleep. "We need to document everything," Thomas told Claire. "Every visit, what he does, what he doesn't do. The court needs to see who's actually parenting this child." So they started keeping detailed records. David's visits rarely lasted the full 2 hours he was allowed. He always had some excuse, a work call, a meeting, an appointment. He never asked about Hope's doctor visits, her feeding schedule, or her development milestones. During one visit, Hope spit up on his expensive suit. David's face twisted in disgust as he thrust the baby at Claire like she was contaminated. "I need to go change," he said, leaving 20 minutes early. Thomas watched from the kitchen, making mental notes. A real parent wouldn't care about a suit. A real parent would laugh it off and keep holding their child. 6 weeks before the hearing, David's lawyer sent another letter. David was demanding more access. He wanted overnight visits. He was questioning Claire's fitness as a mother, citing her postpartum depression. That night, Claire had a breakdown. "He's going to take her," she sobbed. "He's going to use my depression against me and take her away." Thomas held her while she cried, feeling helpless and angry. "We're not going to let that happen. How can we stop it? Look at me, I can barely function some days. What judge is going to give me custody when he can provide everything and I can barely provide anything?" "You provide love," Thomas said firmly. "You provide stability. You provide a mother. That matters more than money, does it?" Claire looked at him with red, swollen eyes. "In the real world, does love really matter more than resources?" Thomas didn't have an answer for that. He didn't know. The next morning, he went to see a lawyer of their own. Linda Martinez was a family law attorney in the nearest big town, with a reputation for being tough and thorough. She listened to the whole story, taking notes and asking questions. When Thomas finished, she sat back in her chair. "This is complicated," she said. "David has biological rights and the court takes those seriously. But Claire has been the primary caregiver since birth. That counts for a lot." "What about the postpartum depression?" Thomas asked. "It could be a problem or it could work in our favor. If we can show that Claire is actively seeking treatment, that she has support, and that she's making progress, it demonstrates responsibility. But we need her therapist to testify. What are our chances?" Linda was quiet for a moment. "Honestly, it could go either way. Judges have a lot of discretion in these cases. But if David's really as disconnected as you say, that will show. Courts care about the best interests of the child, and stability with the primary caregiver usually wins out over money." "Usually. There are no guarantees in family court, Mr. Bennett." Thomas left the lawyer's office feeling more worried than before. But when he got back to Claire's place, he found something that gave him hope. Claire was on the floor with Hope, making silly faces. Hope was giggling, her whole face lighting up with joy. And Claire was laughing too, really laughing in a way Thomas hadn't seen since before Hope was born. "She smiled at me," Claire said, looking up at Thomas with wonder in her eyes. "I mean, she's been smiling for weeks, but this time I felt it. I felt the connection." Thomas sat down next to them, watching Claire interact with her daughter. The therapy was working, slowly, but it was working. Over the next few weeks, Claire's bond with Hope grew stronger. She started being able to feel the love that had been there all along, buried under layers of depression and guilt. She'd wake up naturally for the night feedings, wanting to be the one to comfort her daughter. She'd spend hours just holding Hope, studying her face, marveling at her existence. "I was so scared I couldn't love her," Claire told Thomas one evening. "But I do. I love her so much it terrifies me. The thought of losing her is unbearable." "You're not going to lose her," Thomas said. "We're going to fight and we're going to win." But as the hearing approached, David's tactics became more aggressive. He hired a private investigator who started documenting Thomas's presence in Claire's home. His lawyers filed motions claiming Claire was living with a man she barely knew, questioning the appropriateness of the situation. "They're trying to make you look bad," Linda explained, "trying to paint you as unstable and making poor decisions." "So what do we do?" Claire asked. "We tell the truth. Thomas is a friend who's been helping you through a difficult time. There's nothing inappropriate about that. In fact, it shows you have a strong support system." The week before the hearing, Dr. Reeves prepared her testimony. She'd be speaking about Claire's diagnosis, her treatment, and her progress. "You've come so far," Dr. Reeves told Claire during their last session before court. "When you first came to me, you couldn't look at Hope without feeling overwhelming guilt. Now you can see her for who she really is, your daughter. That's huge." "But I still have bad days," Claire said. "Everyone has bad days. Depression doesn't mean you're a bad mother. It means you're a human being dealing with a medical condition, and you've been brave enough to get help. That's what good mothers do." The night before the hearing, Thomas couldn't sleep. He kept thinking about everything that could go wrong. What if the judge sided with David? What if money and biology won out over love and commitment? What if he had to watch Claire lose the child she'd finally learned to bond with? He went down to the kitchen and found Claire already there, feeding Hope a bottle. "Couldn't sleep either?" she asked. Thomas shook his head. "Too much at stake." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, just watching Hope eat. The baby's eyes were starting to droop, milk-drunk and content. "Thomas," Claire said quietly, "I need to tell you something." He looked at her, concern crossing his face. "What?" "If I lose her tomorrow, if the court decides David should have custody, I don't think I'll survive it. Not because I'll do anything to myself," she added quickly, seeing his alarm, "but because I'll be broken in a way I don't know how to come back from." "You won't lose her," Thomas said, but his voice lacked conviction. "You don't know that. Neither do I." Claire looked down at Hope. "But I need you to know that no matter what happens tomorrow, you've given me something invaluable. You showed me that it's possible to keep living after you lose everything. You showed me that grief doesn't have to be the end of the story." "Claire, let me finish. When I knocked on your door during that storm, I was barely holding on. I was pregnant, alone, and drowning in grief. You could have turned me away, but you didn't. You let me in, and then you kept showing up. You've been more of a father to Hope in these few months than David will ever be." Thomas felt his throat tighten. "She's easy to love. "So are you," Claire said softly. "Rebecca was lucky to have you. And so am I." They sat together until Hope fell asleep. Then Thomas carried the baby to her crib, tucking her in gently. He stood there for a long moment, looking down at her peaceful face. "Tomorrow we fight," he whispered. "And we don't stop fighting until you're safe." The next morning, they dressed in their best clothes and drove to the courthouse. David was already there with his team of lawyers, looking confident and expensive. His suit probably cost more than Claire's car, but when Thomas looked at Claire, he saw something David and his lawyers didn't see. He saw a mother who'd fought through depression and grief to bond with her child. He saw a woman who'd chosen love over guilt, hope over despair. He saw someone who'd proven that real strength isn't about money or power. It's about showing up when everything hurts. They walked into that courtroom together, ready to fight for the little girl who'd changed both their lives, and Thomas sent up a silent prayer to Rebecca, asking her to watch over them, because tomorrow, a judge would decide Hope's future. And nothing would ever be the same again. The courtroom was smaller than Thomas expected. Plain walls, uncomfortable wooden benches, fluorescent lights that flickered occasionally. Judge Catherine Morrison sat behind her bench, a woman in her early 60s with sharp eyes and an expression that gave nothing away. David's lead attorney, a man named Richard Westbrook, went first. He painted David as a successful businessman who'd only recently learned of his daughter's existence and immediately stepped up to take responsibility. He emphasized David's financial stability, his excellent healthcare benefits, the educational opportunities he could provide. "Mr. Chen has the resources to give this child every advantage," Westbrook said. "Private schools, college funds, travel, cultural experiences. He can provide a stable two-parent home once he marries his longtime girlfriend." Thomas's jaw tightened. David had never mentioned a girlfriend during any of his visits. Westbrook then turned his attention to Claire. "Miss Morrison, on the other hand, lives in a rundown rental home. She works sporadically as a freelance graphic designer. She has been diagnosed with postpartum depression and has required substantial help from Mr. Bennett, a man she barely knew 6 months ago. Mr. Bennett has essentially moved into her home, raising questions about her judgment and the stability of the environment." He made it sound sordid, like Claire was irresponsible, unstable, unable to care for her child without a man she'd just met. Thomas wanted to stand up and object, but Linda had warned him to stay quiet unless called to testify. David took the stand. He spoke about discovering he had a daughter, about how much it meant to him, about his plans for Hope's future. He was polished, articulate, convincing. He mentioned the weekly visits, the photos on social media, his desire to be an active father. "I want what's best for Hope," David said earnestly. "I can give her opportunities that Miss Morrison simply cannot provide. I'm not trying to take her away from her mother. I just want to be part of her life in a meaningful way." During cross-examination, Linda went after him. "Mr. Chen, how long do your weekly visits with Hope typically last?" "The full 2 hours," David said confidently. Linda pulled out their documentation. "According to Miss Morrison's records, your visits have averaged 73 minutes. You've left early from every single visit." David shifted. "Sometimes work emergencies come up. Every single week?" "I run a company. Things happen." "Mr. Chen, what's Hope's feeding schedule?" David blinked. "I'm sorry?" "Her feeding schedule. How often does she eat? What formula does she take? I'm not sure of the exact details." "That's what nannies are for." "Nannies," Linda pounced. "So you're planning to hire someone else to raise your daughter?" "No, I mean every working parent has help. Miss Morrison doesn't have a nanny. She cares for Hope herself while working from home." "Because she can't afford help," David shot back. "Or because she wants to be the one raising her daughter," Linda countered. "Mr. Chen, when was Hope's last pediatrician appointment?" "I don't know the exact date. Do you know if she's had one?" "I assume so. You assume. You don't know because you haven't asked, have you? In fact, have you ever asked Miss Morrison about Hope's health, her development, her sleep patterns, anything beyond superficial questions?" David's polished exterior was starting to crack. "I care about my daughter. Do you? Or do you care about looking like a father?" Linda's voice was sharp now. "You post photos on social media. You talk about providing opportunities, but you don't know what formula she drinks. You can't complete a full 2-hour visit with her. You've never been there in the middle of the night when she cries. You don't know her doctor's name. So tell me, Mr. Chen, what exactly have you provided beyond money? Objection, Westbrook said. Argumentative. Sustained, Judge Morrison said. But I'd like to hear the answer anyway, Mr. Chen. David looked flustered. I'm learning. I'm new to this. That's why I need more time with her, to build that connection. A connection you could have been building this whole time if you'd actually engaged during your visits, Linda said. No further questions. Claire was called to the stand next. She looked pale but determined. Linda walked her through everything. Meeting Thomas during the storm, his support through her pregnancy and after, her struggles with postpartum depression, and most importantly, her love for hope. Tell the court about your treatment, Linda prompted. I see Dr. Patricia Reeves twice a week for therapy, Claire said. I'm on medication for the postpartum depression. It's been hard, but I'm getting better. And through all of it, I've taken care of my daughter. I'm the one who wakes up with her at night. I'm the one who knows she likes to be rocked in a specific way when she's fussy. I know she's starting to recognize my voice, that she smiles when I sing to her. Her voice grew stronger. I'm not perfect. I'm not rich. But I love my daughter more than anything in this world. And I show up for her every single day, even on the days when I can barely get out of bed, because that's what mothers do. Westbrook's cross-examination was brutal. He brought up her affair, her deception about Hope's paternity, her depression. He tried to make her look unstable, unreliable, morally questionable. But Claire held her ground. I made a mistake years ago, one I deeply regret. But that mistake gave me my daughter, and I will spend the rest of my life making sure she knows she's loved and wanted. My depression is a medical condition I'm treating, not a character flaw. And as for Mr. Bennett's presence in our lives, he's been nothing but helpful and appropriate. He's been the kind of friend everyone deserves when they're going through the hardest time of their life. Dr. Reeves testified next. She was professional and thorough, explaining postpartum depression, Claire's diagnosis, her treatment plan, and her progress. Is Miss Morrison capable of caring for her child? Linda asked. Absolutely, Dr. Reeves said firmly. She has a medical condition that she's actively treating. With proper support and continued therapy, her prognosis is excellent. More importantly, she has demonstrated strong maternal instincts and deep love for her daughter. Many women experience postpartum depression. It doesn't make them bad mothers. In your professional opinion, would removing Hope from Miss Morrison's care be harmful? Potentially very harmful. Hope knows her mother. She's bonded with her. Disrupting that primary attachment could have lasting psychological effects on the child. And it would be devastating for Miss Morrison, which could worsen her depression significantly. Finally, Thomas was called to testify. As he walked to the stand, he made eye contact with Claire. She looked terrified. He gave her a small nod. We've got this. Linda asked him to explain his relationship with Claire and Hope. Thomas told the truth. Meeting during the storm, recognizing a fellow grieving person, offering help, and slowly becoming part of their lives. Why did you choose to involve yourself so deeply? Linda asked. Thomas thought carefully about his answer. My wife and I always wanted children. We couldn't have them, and I'd made peace with that. Then she died and I lost my purpose. When Claire needed help, it gave me a reason to keep going. And when Hope was born, I saw this tiny person who needed protecting and I couldn't walk away. Are you in love with Miss Morrison? No, Thomas said clearly. I care about her deeply as a friend. We understand each other's grief. But what we have is friendship and shared purpose, nothing more. And Hope? Thomas's voice softened. I love that little girl like she was my own. I know I'm not her father. I know I don't have any legal rights. But I've been there for every middle-of-the-night feeding, every doctor's appointment, every milestone. I've changed her diapers, rocked her to sleep, worried about her health. I can't imagine my life without her in it. Westbrook came at him hard during cross-examination. Isn't it true, Mr. Bennett, that you barely knew Miss Morrison before inserting yourself into her life? I knew her well enough to know she needed help. And you saw an opportunity? A vulnerable woman with a baby, a ready-made family to replace the one you lost? Thomas kept his temper in check. I saw a person in need, I helped. That's what decent people do. You've essentially taken over her household. Don't you think that's inappropriate? I've helped with childcare while she recovered from birth and dealt with depression. There's nothing inappropriate about helping a friend. A friend who you met 6 months ago. Sometimes the best friendships start in difficult circumstances. Claire and I understand loss in a way most people don't. That created a bond. It doesn't make our friendship less valid.